The Ukrainian flag is once again in the center of Pokrovsk. The Ukrainian armed forces have cut off the Russian salient to the north of the city, and fighting is already taking place on the floor of the Kakhovka reservoir. Latest news, what's happening on the front today? Watch right now. Today, Pokrovsk is the main hotspot of the Russian-Ukrainian war. The main objective of the enemy is to gain as strong a foothold in the city as possible, according to the Ukrainian armed forces. To do this, the enemy is increasingly using civilian clothing. In particular, this is how they managed to raise the Russian tricolor over the Pokrovsk City Council. A few hours later, the defense forces restored the Ukrainian flag to its place, destroying an observation post inside the building and clearing out the enemy in the process. At the same time, fighting continues in other districts of the city as well.
Special units of the Ukrainian Defense Forces have eliminated more than 100 Russian occupiers. These are only irrecoverable losses, not counting the so-called sanitary losses. At the moment, the main efforts of the special units of the main intelligence directorate of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine and the Special Operations Forces are focused on unblocking the logistics of the Ukrainian Defense Forces and expanding the area of presence in order to prevent the possible operational encirclement of our units.
At the same time, during attacks on Pokrovsk, the Russians tried to take advantage of the weather, according to fighters on the ground. And the first attempts to drive through the city using vehicles have already been recorded.
Meanwhile, National Guard drone operators from the Hostraya Kartuzy unit are noting an unpleasant trend. The Russians are at least trying to enter Pokrovsk using vehicles. Unfortunately, the bad weather is currently playing into the hands of the occupiers, writes Hostraya Kartuzy. If before we saw Russian troops infiltrating Pokrovsk exclusively on foot, with the occasional attempt to break through on a motorcycle at most, today, due to the fog, we have already spotted the first Russian military pickup truck in the city. They leisurely dismantled the barricades and drove through the streets of Pokrovsk.
However, they were later destroyed, the analysts add. At the same time, the main clashes are already taking place on the far outskirts of Pokrovsk. Within the city itself, both Ukrainian and Russian positions remain. Both sides are making a particular effort not to draw attention to themselves, so as not to attract the barrage of drones.
The main fighting between Ukrainian and Russian units is taking place specifically on the northern outskirts. The Ukrainian forces that remain deeper within the city are not drawing attention for now. They are likely waiting for reinforcements to strengthen their counterattacks. As a result, the Russian infiltration has gradually deprived Ukraine of control over most of Pokrovsk, creating a gray zone. But Russian soldiers are also unable to take control of it. They lack sufficient forces, and the threat from drones is too great.
However, this situational success of the occupiers is primarily due to enormous losses. As our drone operators report, assault groups usually consist of 3 people, with the clear expectation that 2 will almost certainly be killed, and if anyone survives, it will be just 1.
In some areas near Pokrovsk and in Pokrovsk itself, Russian losses reach a ratio of 1 to 18 in favor of the Ukrainians. That is, for every wounded or killed Ukrainian soldier, there are up to 18 killed and wounded Russian servicemen.
Russian units are also aware of these statistics, which is why every time reinforcements are brought in for the occupiers, it looks roughly like this.
In the water, in the soldier, they wrap the pillows, spray bandage cans. Is the driver okay?
Meanwhile, analysts are noting the successes of the defense forces north of Pokrovsk. There, the Russian Federation continues to try to outflank our group, but time and again they fail.
These are the tactical successes of the Ukrainian Defense Forces in the area of Shakov and Rodinsky. These 2 settlements are key for ensuring the logistics of the Ukrainian Defense Forces at this moment, and our defenders have managed to significantly improve their positions in these directions. In addition, there has been significant progress in the area of Shakov. This effectively allows us to cut off the so-called incursion of Russian troops into the defense of the Ukrainian Defense Forces.
Putin's troops are also failing to achieve their objectives in Kupyansk. The city, which according to Gerasimov has supposedly been encircled for 2 weeks, is putting up such resistance that the Russians haven't advanced a single meter there during this time.
Naturally, there is absolutely no question whatsoever of Kupyansk being encircled, just as with the situation in Pokrovsk, because the Russians' plan was to attempt to envelop from the north, break through the river from the south, cut off a large group of Ukrainian troops, eliminate them, and thereby create a significant breach in our defensive lines. That's what they wanted, but they failed to achieve it. That's why the assaults continue, as this infiltration method from the north into the city persists. However, The Ukrainian defense forces are acting actively and decisively both in Kupyansk itself and to its north.
Meanwhile, an unexpected direction of fighting is unfolding in the Zaporizhzhia sector, right on the bottom of the Kakhovka reservoir.
Yes, it has already dried out enough for soldiers to pass through there. As a result, Ukrainian special forces made it to the Bolshaya Kuchuguri Islands, where a Russian position was already located. The Ukrainians achieved victory. Now the islands are just part of the mainland. They've raised their flag there. Music plays. By the way, Bolshaya Kuchuguri used to look like this. For a long time after the dam breach, the bottom of the Kakhovka reservoir remained boggy and soft, but gradually it dried out and became overgrown with grass and shrubs. As we can see, infantry can already move there. Light vehicles most likely can as well.
And finally, new details have emerged regarding the recent Ukrainian armed forces strike on Donetsk. As is known, a warehouse storing Shahed-type drones was hit there the day before. Now it has become known how many of them were there.
The estimated number of Shahed-type UAVs, including Geran, that were stored in the warehouses at Donetsk airport is about 1,150 to 1,200. Whether all of them were destroyed is unknown. According to analysts' estimates, this is roughly a month's supply of Shaheds for use at the front line, that is, for striking tactical targets on the front line, for which the Shaheds are essentially converted into giant FPV drones.
Let me remind you, most experts agree that the strike was carried out by Ukrainian Flamingo missiles, which in fact successfully breached Russian air defenses 3 times in 4 days.
The Russian army is losing its grip. The advance of the occupying forces in the Pokrovsk direction has somewhat slowed down. This is stated in the latest report from the Institute for the Study of War. However, analysts emphasize that this situation is temporary. Right now, the enemy is actively redeploying reserves and concentrating forces in this sector of the front. And very soon, assaults and attacks may resume with renewed strength.
At least up to half of the enemy's main forces are concentrated here, with a significant portion focusing their efforts and attention on this area, even though the situation is no less difficult in other directions.
In recent days, the Russians have also made gains in the area of Mironohrad, east of Pokrovsk. Russian military bloggers are talking about the capture of western Rivne and most of Krasny Lyman. There is evidence that the Russians are breaking through toward the Pokrovsk-Dobropilya highway in eastern Pokrovsk. However, our defenders are holding their positions.
The balance of forces is changing because the enemy is being crushed there. Overall, by and large, the task of Ukraine's defense forces is to inflict maximum damage on those armies advancing on Pokrovsk.
According to some military observers, part of the Pokrovsk area has become a so-called gray zone, with control shifting back and forth.
It's more like a vinaigrette, if you will. Here it's red, here it's black, here it's white, and every hour or even every single moment, the situation changes there, shifting and evolving in unpredictable ways. But the overall trend, the general direction, remains the same, staying consistent despite all these constant ongoing changes and fluctuations. Having approached with the forces of the Second Army from the south, from the southwest, they were unable to advance into the city. They were waiting for the 51st Army to encircle the Pokrovsko-Mirnograd agglomeration from the north. But then the 51st Army decided to bite off more than they could chew.
So now the occupiers are not trying to gain a foothold in Pokrovsk itself. The enemy wants to break through the city to its northern outskirts.
Serhiy Okishev, 7th Rapid Response Corps of the Ukrainian Air Assault Forces. Russian troops are somewhat slowing down their offensive operations in the Pokrovsk direction, waiting for reinforcements, and are trying to establish defenses and expand logistics to South Pokrovsk.
According to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, there have been at least 73 Russian assaults in the Pokrovsk direction over the past day. At this very moment, fighting is taking place near Vladimirovka, Fedorovka, Nikanorovka, Krasny Liman, Orekhovo, and Filial. Unable to boast of other achievements, soldiers of the Kremlin's army resort to their favorite tactic, terror. For example, Russian drone operators have repeatedly tried to destroy the Ukrainian flag in Kramatorsk just to spite the Ukrainian armed forces in any way they can. But our flag turned out to be much quicker than yet another Russian drone operator. As a result, frustrated by his failure, the occupier simply smashed his FPV drone into the ground. After watching videos like this, you can't help but ask, what kind of idiots are working there? The answer is just the usual kind.
This one doesn't want to move at all. It's just standing its ground.
After horses and donkeys, the occupiers are now actively enlisting sheep and rams into service. It's worth noting that the Russian Ministry of Defense at least gives the animals bulletproof vests, which are an unaffordable luxury for many contract soldiers. However, even so, unlike Russians, the animals refuse to willingly go to slaughter.
Come on, go. They're waiting for you over there, the curly ones. That's it. There you go. Walk slowly. Come on. A real combat unit.
The Russian army is currently so short on available soldiers that they're not only conscripting sheep, but also recruiting circus performers as well.
My backstory is that I was originally an acrobat in the circus. And then, after experiencing some really bad and unfortunate falls, I basically ended my professional career and was subsequently mobilized.
In the circus, a disabled person turned out to be useless to anyone, but for meat assaults, he was a perfect fit. By the way, the acrobat was given a fitting team as partners.
So in our group, there was me, the acrobat, a life safety and social studies teacher, an altar boy, and an auto mechanic. And that's the kind of team we probably lived with.
And all of this, according to Putin, is the second army in the world. But really, why be surprised by circus performers and sheep at the front, when even Russian soldiers themselves are treated like cattle by their own generals, sold and traded literally by weight?
You see, the Ministry of Defense recruits people, gives them dog tags and weapons, and then it turns out they don't exist. So selling them, what's the problem? They never existed and still don't.
In the Zaporizhzhia direction, commanders openly sell their refuseniks into forced labor to collaborators. Instead of legally processing their refusal or sending them to disciplinary units, those unwilling to take part in meat grinder assaults are listed as missing, detained, and handed over for unpaid forced labor throughout the Zaporizhzhia region. For this, commanders receive substantial sums of money from the collaborators. Such Russian refuseniks are already being found en masse at factories and construction sites in Melitopol and Berdyansk.
They're not even cannon fodder. They're not even serfs. They're just, I don't know, people sell chicks with more consideration and compassion than this.
In the past 24 hours, there have been 276 combat engagements on the front line. And on the hottest front, Pokrovsk, Ukrainian defenders repelled 100 attacks.
Pokrovsk, we continue to destroy the occupier. I would also like to especially highlight the Special Forces of the Security Service of Ukraine, SBU, Central Security Service, CSO, who are systematically and very effectively destroying Russian occupiers and their equipment in the Pokrovsk area, as well as in the city itself.
The General Staff reports that the Ukrainian armed forces are successfully repelling enemy attempts to gain a foothold in the city.
The enemy, just so you understand, in a year and 2 months, actually even longer, of trying to take Pokrovsk has already lost more than 200,000 of its soldiers there. The Russians' losses are colossal.
Despite Russian media loudly claiming the capture of Pokrovsk, Ukrainian soldiers are showing a different reality.
Plus, you are the best. You are the best.
Ukrainian fighters have returned the Ukrainian flag to the city council building in Pokrovsk.
They advanced into the building, cleared it, eliminated the enemy there, and raised the Ukrainian flag.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
Nevertheless,
Russia continues its attempts to seize and encircle the city, just as we control the entire 15-kilometer zone with all logistics and ammunition supply. The enemy controls our 15-kilometer zone as well. The situation in Pokrovsk is stable. I can't say that we have any problematic issues or that Pokrovsk could be encircled. Our assault units are carrying out their missions under contract. They advance on the enemy, defend positions, reclaim territory, and straighten the defensive line.
it is reported that holding Pokrovsk is only a matter of a few days or weeks. But Ukrainian soldiers are still determined to hold the city for as long as possible.
I can say one thing, that Ukrainian forces are defending Pokrovsk, determined to hold the city as long as possible. They are actively resisting enemy advances and maintaining their defensive line. The process will continue, progressing steadily and without interruption until every aspect of the infrastructure has been completely destroyed. This includes not only the obvious physical structures such as roads, bridges, and buildings, but also the underlying systems that support daily life, like power grids, water supply networks, and communication lines. The destruction will be thorough, ensuring that nothing essential for the functioning of society remains intact or operational. A more symbolic meaning than a tactical one. Our enemy is suffering substantial and disproportionate losses. I'll repeat this once more for emphasis. In just over a year, he has already lost more than 200,000 of his servicemen in the Pokrovsk direction,
including armored vehicles, helicopters, and planes downed by our forces. The battlefield is unequal, with Russia assaulting daily, with small groups.
Only with small sabotage groups does the enemy infiltrate the territory of Pokrovsk. They move in groups of 1 or 2 people, gather at a certain point, and then 2 more come along, also disguised as civilians, carrying some bags, carrying some things, sacks. That's it. This is done with small groups. But what's also interesting is that the Kremlin
is sending people to this direction who are completely unfit for combat. Fierce fighting continues there as well. However, Ukrainian units have managed to regain control over part of the urban area in the city. Nevertheless, it is still too early to say that the situation is fully under control. Drone operators helped secure the riverbank and stop enemy crossings. The bunker grandpa got angry and decided to throw all his forces at Pokrovsk. But of course not his own, but those of his citizens. The battles for control over the cities of Kupyansk and Pokrovsk, 2 strategic hubs on Ukraine's eastern front. Russia cancelled a planned show of strength and sent its forces to attack Pokrovsk. Fighting for Kupyansk and Pokrovsk continues daily.
Ukrainian forces are holding back assaults, inflicting heavy losses on the enemy. In the Kupyansk and Pokrovsk directions, the occupiers use scorched earth tactics, massive strikes on Ukraine's defense positions, temporary deployment points, and especially residential infrastructure, along with various destructive means, including heavy flamethrower systems. Pokrovsk, a city in eastern Ukraine, is now at the center of the fiercest fighting. The battles taking place in and around Pokrovsk have become especially intense, making this area a focal point of the ongoing conflict as both sides engage in relentless combat.
This is, as you may already be aware, simply
roughly a quarter, or about 1 out of every 4, of all the military units that make up the army belonging to the country currently occupying this area are included in this number. This highlights the significant presence of the occupying country's armed forces. Plus, the occupiers have an advantage in the use of frontline and army aviation. This means strikes are being carried out on the positions of Ukraine's defense forces, which are currently located on the territory of Ukraine.
Occupiers have an advantage in frontline and army aviation, striking Ukrainian defense positions with guided bombs. Russian forces are tightening their grip, aiming to encircle the city. Kremlin propaganda claims a cauldron, but this is information manipulation denied by Ukraine's general staff. Moscow's claim of a complete encirclement. At the same time, they acknowledge that the situation there is extremely serious.
Over the past several days, Ukraine's defense forces have managed to significantly stabilize the overall situation directly in Pokrovsk itself. By order of the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Moscow claims full encirclement, but also admits the situation is very serious. Recently, Ukraine's forces have stabilized Pokrovsk with special units deployed by the commander-in-chief. Ukraine's defense forces, who are currently engaged in comprehensive search operations aimed at destroying small enemy assault groups.
Moreover, fighters from the 425th Separate Assault Regiment Skala cleared the city council building in Pokrovsk and raised the Ukrainian flag. This is a symbol not only of military, but also of political
significance. Special units of Ukraine's defense forces, including in particular the highly trained and specialized Special Operations Forces of the Main Intelligence Directorate of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, are currently actively involved in the ongoing operations, contributing their expertise and playing a crucial role in the mission. In closing off and forcing the enemy to withdraw. Of the unit. This is the main task assigned to these special units.
There are also tactical successes in adjacent areas in the Pokrovsk direction. On the Dobropilya salient, Ukrainian defenders have taken control of the settlement of Shakova. This complicates the enemy's plans for a large-scale breakthrough and increases
the chances for local stabilization. This is the so-called Dobropilya salient. It is precisely Shakova that effectively cuts off Russian units from their rear supply bases. In addition, over the past week, Ukrainian defense forces have deoccupied a number of settlements in this direction. These are Kucherev, Yarshakove, and Sukachki, Russian units from their rear supply bases. In addition, over the past week, Ukrainian defense forces have deoccupied
Kucherev, Yarshakove, and Sukachki have been taken, improving the tactical situation. In Kupyansk, Kharkiv region, fighting continues for every street and building, with flags changing on houses several times daily.
In the Kupyansk area, the situation has been stabilized, and even Russian sources note the lack of advances both in the Kupyansk direction, and Ukrainian forces are carrying out a series of counterattacks.
In particular, in the northern part of the city, the defenders managed to push back the occupiers, but it's too early to speak of a final success. The situation remains dynamic and unstable, changing literally every hour. The defense forces every day
are engaging within their assigned sectors. They carry out their missions without stopping, constantly eliminating both small groups and halting columns of equipment. In the near future, the dynamics, both according to Deep State and other maps, will be constantly changing. Because in any case, we are not going to abandon the city or give it up to the enemy.
Pokrovsky Club Tanzik, 2 points. Our forces persist, the city stands. Pokrovsky and Kupyansk decide the war. Thousands of soldiers and tons of metal there. But it has not been able to break Ukrainian resilience. Every meter of this land, thousands of soldiers and tons of metal there. But they have not been able to break Ukrainian resilience. Every meter of this land is a fight for life, for the future. And while the enemy tries to win by sheer numbers, Ukrainian fighters are destroying those numbers. The generals of the Russian Federation promised Kremlin leader Putin to capture Kupyansk and Pokrovsk, but they have not been able to carry out the order.
They couldn't do it. Putin gave the order to capture everything by mid-October, or rather, to be more precise, by November. By the way, the original deadline that was set was October 15th, but unfortunately, that deadline didn't work out as planned. The next one, the following deadline, is by
to capture Pokrovsk, Marinka, and Konstantinovka by mid-November. Otherwise, apparently heads and epaulets will roll. At the very least, the chief of the general staff and the Air Force general will be dismissed. President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelensky
announced complete clearing of Kupyansk and Kharkiv region from occupiers. Up to 60 Russians remain in Kupyansk. Clearing continues. We will clear everything out. We know. Basically, the dates have been set. They were discussed at the headquarters. We won't be sharing this information for now.
The Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation urgently prepared a response. Supposedly, the Russians are advancing in the city.
The head of the Kyiv regime has completely lost touch with reality, and listening to Syrsky's false reports is absolutely unaware of the actual situation on the ground. A clearing operation is underway with set dates not shared. Russia claims advances. Kyiv's leader may not know or accepts the situation is hopeless.
Ukrainian Armed Forces Kupyansk. The chief of the Russian General Staff, Valery Gerasimov, falsely reported to the Kremlin dictator that Russian troops had completed the encirclement of Ukrainian forces.
Days earlier, Putin claimed gains near Kupyansk. General Staff Chief Valery Gerasimov falsely reported to the Kremlin
Russian troops had encircled Ukrainian forces. Your comrades are advancing on all fronts. However, Ukrainian forces held their positions despite this.
The enemy is shelling crossings and trying to break through defenses. The desire to seize as much territory as possible in Donbass in order to show
that they are carrying out a so-called special military operation, fulfilling their function. Ukrainian units have already managed to regain control over part of the urban area in the city. A military operation by Ukrainian forces is underway with the goal of cutting off the enemy's supply routes and clearing the city.
Several units are taking part in it. We destroy them, but their numbers do not decrease. That is, they are constantly bringing in reinforcements. A new sabotage group comes in. These saboteurs, Ukrainian units, have already managed to regain control over part of the urban area in the city. A military operation by Ukrainian forces is underway,
with the important and challenging task of cutting off the enemy's critical supply routes and thoroughly clearing the city of hostile forces. Several different military units are actively involved in this complex operation. In September, Russian occupiers managed to break into Kupyansk through a pipeline, exploiting a vulnerable point. Against this backdrop, the situation in Kupyansk in October the situation around the city has intensified. Now the occupiers are trying to enter the city disguised as civilians. Once Ukrainian forces manage to completely cut off the supply routes and finish clearing Kupyansk, it will complicate the logistics of Russian units in this sector and may reduce their operational mobility. It took the Russian Federation's army 21 months to advance, only
have to walk to their positions because moving by vehicle has become too dangerous.
Russian troops continue their active offensive toward Pokrovsk in the Donetsk region.
Have to walk to their positions because moving by vehicle has become too dangerous. Russian troops continue their active offensive toward Pokrovsk in the Donetsk region. The Russians are trying to operate
covertly, approaching our positions through tree lines. We detect and destroy the enemy. In Pokrovsk, combat with vehicles is difficult because the city is full of anti-tank hedgehogs and concrete triangles. Mostly enemy infantry uses motorcycles
and buggies. Their ability to break through enemy lines and obstacles has been severely limited. As a result, they have virtually no opportunity or realistic chance to advance any further into the area around Kupyansk.
Their
measures are in place, enemy numbers are dropping, our teams are there, and Russian troops are concentrated. Sabotage groups are being pursued. What complicates the defense of the city is that
the occupiers of the
Russians entered Pokrovsk disguised as civilians and began attacks. Small groups acted at night, but defense forces responded.
The enemy's attempts to cut off our supply lines and disrupt our communications have made it increasingly difficult for us to maintain effective operations.
The Pokrovsk-Mirnohrad highway, the air assault forces, Marines and mechanized brigades.
These are now the main barrier for Russians in Pokrovsk, but everyone is doing well. Recently, the Russian armed forces have not succeeded in Pokrovsk. There are about 260 to 300 Russian servicemen in the city.
30% of all combat operations on the front are taking place in Pokrovsk. At the same time, 50% of Russia's use of KRBs is directed at Pokrovsk. In total, there are currently 260 to 300 Russians in the city. The situation in the Kupyansk sector
and Pokrovsk directions remains dynamic. The fighting continues. The Russian army is suffering simply enormous losses in the Pokrovsk direction. In just one day, there are hundreds killed in this area alone. Reports and local publications show this in the built-up areas and along the Russia has allocated an astonishing amount of manpower and resources to capture this city.
Russia has devoted huge manpower and materials to capture this city. They infiltrated and were meant to act, but not to hold or accumulate.
Russian commanders continue to launch assaults in waves, disregarding the lives of their own soldiers, just to please Putin and present any kind of advance as a victory.